Howdy everyone, you're listening to the Blue Jeans and Boots podcast, where genetics grad students talk about how to navigate a PhD program while trying to stay sane. We also invite faculty from our interdisciplinary program here at Texas A&M onto the show and pick their brains about their research, what it's like being a principal investigator, and their journey to becoming a professor here at A&M. In this episode, we'll talk to Serina Taluja. Serina is the founder and creator for this amazing podcast, in addition to being a fourth-year graduate student in the genetics program. She is in Dr. David Stelly's lab, and her graduate work has been focused on characterizing and manipulating meiotic recombination in cotton to increase overall diversity in cultivated species. My name is Anthony, and I'll be one of your co-hosts today.
And my name is Ramiah, your other co-host. So Serina, can you tell us a bit about your graduate work?
Sure. So like Anthony already said, my work overall focuses on meiotic recombination in cultivated cotton. And so I use multiple different techniques to try and manipulate the recombination landscape in the genome to ideally increase the levels of recombination, because the goal is to increase the overall genetic diversity, so like the gene pool that breeders have access to in cultivated cotton.
So you're making like super cotton.
Super cotton, that's the plan.
Oh gosh.
My favorite, it is kind of super cotton because there's wild species of cotton that are so much more equipped to deal with, the environment than the cultivated cotton that we produce like on a grand scale in agriculture. So it's kind of cool to get to work with all the wild species. It makes me feel more like an ecologist. I am by no means an ecologist, but it makes me feel like an adventurer,
Yeah. So like we're getting better cotton for the genes?
Better cotton for the jeans, you know it.
Nice.
Blue jeans and boots. Yeah, we're working on better blue jeans. Yeah.
Very nice.
So is that, is the reason why the cotton is so, uniform now? Mm-hmm. Is that due to the domestication that we have performed over hundreds of years?
So there's a couple of different theories as to why it's so uniform. So there's like big stretches of the genome that are called haplotypic blocks where there's really limited recombination. There's also really limited genetic diversity. So a lot of the cultivated cotton around the world in these large spanses of the genome look exactly the same. Like the sequence is so similar that it's concerning. And we don't know to what degree that has to do with domestication and like thousands of years of selective breeding, because cultivated cotton goes way, way back through a lot of civilizations. But it also could be an effect of like a founder effect, because the original, so there's diploid cotton and there's tetraploid cotton. And so the diploid species are mostly the wild species. Two of them are still cultivated in regions of Africa. But originally, two diploids hybridized, and that's what produced the tetraploids. So we don't know if that hybridization event and then that really narrow genetic basis for all the tetraploids, which is most of the cultivated cotton, like in the US and China and India, could have something to do with why there's such a lower level of recombination in the genome.
And just real quick, can you explain what diploid versus triploid means?
Yes, absolutely. Well, tetraploid.
Tetraploid,
I can explain triploid, but
okay.
So diploid means that you have two copies of each chromosome. So you've got like chromosome 1, one from mom, one from dad, chromosome 2, one from mom, one from dad, etc. A tetraploid, there's 4 copies of each chromosome. So you can do any number, like humans are diploid, cotton is tetraploid, bananas that we eat are triploids. That's why they have no seeds, because triploids are sterile.
Bananas have seeds?
Bananas have seeds. The diploids and the tetraploids have seeds.
Oh,
and
wow.
The reason, and we eat the triploids because they don't have seeds, because the seeds in bananas are huge. Like the
really?
Naturally occurring species, they're big. Yeah. It's wild.
So plantains, same thing? They're triploid?
Ooh, I don't know for sure,
okay.
but I would imagine. I don't want to talk out of turn on the plantain people, but I'm pretty sure, yes.
Me being a plantain people.
Yeah.
Yeah, anything that's seedless, like seedless watermelon, it's because I don't remember if it's a triploid or... Anyway, it's sterile. Anything without seeds. Grapes, sterile.
Yeah. Wow, I am befuddled. Never in my life would I have imagined that bananas had seeds. Like, I would have just told you you're lying.
Yeah.
You are wrong.
Thankfully, the bananas that we interface with do not have seeds, because I feel like that would be difficult.
So, did you always know that you wanted to work with plants?
To some degree. I started working with flowers, actually, so like cut flowers. When I was in high school, I worked for a florist, and I loved that, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. When I got to college and I decided I wanted to study molecular biology, I was like, okay, well, molecular biology is medical, obviously. I didn't even think about it being, you know, like any life you can do molecular biology on. But so I went medical for a little while I was an undergrad, which is funny because I interned at places that worked on plants. So I worked in a herbarium for a little while. I worked in a corn lab for a little while that studied like maize genetics. But I always had an interest in like medical field. That was also our entire degree program at my undergrad institution was for like pre-med, pre-optometry, pre-dentistry. So that was kind of the path that I believed existed for people with my degree. But I knew that plants were something that I cared very much about. So when I got to graduate school, I tried out a whole bunch of things. You know the story. I tried out some like mouse work, found out I'm really squeamish around mice. Tried out breast cancer work. That was really cool too. But I landed on cotton research because honestly, what it came down to is I felt so much more calm walking into the greenhouse than I did walking into like the mouse house. My heart rate would go all the way up in the mouse house, and in the greenhouse I felt like, so I figured for 5 years of my life that was probably a smarter decision for my overall health.
Yeah, someone who works with mice, I completely understand.
It's such important research. It's just
it takes a lot. Like some of those days, like I put tears into things. So I definitely understand your decision there. So I have to ask you. You're a plant mom, aren't you?
I'm a plant mom. I have so many houseplants. It's so stereotypical too. But I have so many houseplants. I love them very, very much. People have asked me before if I name my houseplants or if I name my cotton, and I name neither because there's too many of both.
That's fair.
Yeah, I enjoy my plants.
So how'd you go from being so focused on plants and trying to help advance that field to science communication, which I feel like is often associated with, you know, human health, and like the outreach is a lot focused on the medical side of things.
Right.
So how does a cotton person get into the podcast arena?
Well, so I knew I wanted to go into science communication even before I knew I was coming to graduate school, honestly. So when I was an undergrad, and actually it's funny that you say that it's mostly centered on human health, because that's absolutely true. And science communication is sort of inherently human focused because it's about humanizing science, because, you know, we know science is like this like entity that exists that studies questions, things that we don't know the answers to, whether it's biological, physical, chemical, you name it. But it's inherently about people, even if you're communicating about like purely medical things or agriculture, because agriculture has to do with nutrition and food,
right?
Which is still sort of a human-centered thing. But my first introduction to science communication was in an agricultural communications class, which I took because I needed to fulfill a writing credit for my degree. And I was like, this class seems easy, honestly. That's why I picked it. I was like, I think that this is going to be a breeze and I need to get it over with. And I had no idea that signing up for that class would change my entire outlook on my career, because I loved every second of the class. I loved getting to write. I loved talking to the people. I got to do like communications audits on companies, and it was all agriculturally focused because that was the title of the class. But I didn't even think about like plants, agriculture together. It's the same thing, you know. Agriculture is like cultivating plants, and obviously there's like livestock too. But it had just never like been presented to me that way, and I was like, oh wow, like I can combine my love for all things that are green with my enjoyment of people and still have science integrated in there.
So awesome. I love that one class just changes your outlook. I had a similar situation my freshman year.
Really?
I took one of the required electives just to fulfill that requirement, and then I ended up getting a second degree just from that class.
The second degree?
What was your second degree in?
Anthropology.
I actually took a forensic anthropology class, and it was so much fun.
No way.
I'm one of those people that's like, I always hated the history classes because they're always talking about wars and things. But this was a cultural anthropology class. So we got to talk about the cultures that were, you know, populating around the world at the same time, and viewing it through the lens of not white people dominating, and we can cut that out.
Leave it in.
I personally don't think we should cut it out.
But that's who wrote the history textbooks, right? So growing up, that's all. I don't care about the wars. I don't care who conquered who. I want to know about, you know, the Greek pottery. How did they make it? What kind of clay did they use? How is that different from Native American stuff? And we got to explore that in that class, and it influenced me so much that I got a second degree in it. So it's really cool when that one little thing that, and I guess that's kind of a shout out to the undergrads. Keep your mind open when you're going through your coursework, because I was very closed off going into that class, and coming out of it, I feel like my world just opened up so much.
Yeah, definitely. Like those classes that you think that your university or your degree program is just like, oh, well, you need to take this class. Like sometimes like the information or even just the connections like with your professor or another student in that class can just take you so far. Not necessarily like change your whole directory, but just give you a different outlook on things. And that's really what you want to have as a scientist. And I would also assume as a science communicator as well, that has to be something very important for the job, is having not just one like down the hall view of things, but being able to see things from multiple different standpoints, so that way you can explain things and communicate things effectively to a wide group of individuals.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And I think that's something that I'd like you to talk about a little bit, is how do we go about disseminating our research from, up on our pedestal in this university to the people that are actually going to be impacted by it?
Right. And that's a really good question. And I think it's something that people are still trying to answer in science communication as a whole, honestly, is like, how do we get all of the really good research that people are doing out to the people who are going to be affected by it? And honestly, stuff like what we're doing right now, having a podcast, having a blog, even like reaching out to people within the university. Every university has like a public relations department that is in charge of doing like press releases about research that's coming out. And they don't always have to be splashy. Like you don't have to have like a Nature publication associated with your work. You can just be like, we're doing things that are going to affect like our community or another community or like the whole community, like the general populace, and we want to be able to talk about it. And a lot of times the people that are used to doing all the writing, like the communicators for your institution, are really receptive to that, because most of the time they're reaching out to people hoping to get responses from researchers, which I think we all know can be a little challenging sometimes, which is fair. We have a lot to do. But reaching out to those people and being like, I want to be able to talk. And honestly, it's really good professional development for the scientists too, to be able to effectively communicate what you're doing to someone who doesn't have any training in your background.
Right.
So that would be my number one recommendation, is like reach out to people. Like if you're willing to talk about your work, there are people that are willing to listen.
So would you say that was your inspiration for wanting to start Blue Jeans and Boots?
I'd say a little bit, yeah, because there's just so many things, and I really like our program. I think that it's a really strong group of people, like both in like the sense that we support each other emotionally really well, but we're also all like crazy smart. Like it's so cool to be in a group of people that have so many new ideas and work on such a wide variety of topics, that I was like, other people should know about how cool this is, and like how diverse in like field and in personality and in everything that all of us are. So that was kind of the start for Blue Jeans and Boots.
Yeah. So what would you say has been your favorite part of our podcast so far? It's hard. There's so many moments.
I know. It's like, it's so cute. I love working with you guys, obviously. The people are like the best part, honestly. And I mean, I got to talk to a lot of people within the program that I normally would never have gotten to talk to, like some professors that just aren't in my field, or even some people like in the program who I knew a little bit about their research, but not a lot. I've learned a lot from it. And yeah, I really liked picking out our name. Honestly, that was fun for me. We had a poll that we sent out to everybody to pick out the name, and my name won.
I was going to ask who came up with it.
It was me.
Were there any other top contenders?
Oh, God, I don't even remember now. It would have been February of 2021 or January.
Oh,
So
wow.
I feel like there's a Google Doc in the drive somewhere.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we definitely have them saved somewhere. There were some really good ones, honestly. Yeah. People got creative with it. But, yeah.
So, speaking of the challenges, what would be the most challenging aspect of running this podcast?
Well, like, probably being a guest, because we put you in the hot seat now.
That's fair. First time in the hot seat.
Being a guest is hard. I would say that's a tricky question, because I've really enjoyed so much of it, but I think that learning how to like lead a team, and I've sort of led teams before, but nothing as big, nothing as like, it was never going to be something so public either. We're on Spotify and this is going to go on YouTube, and I was like, hi. Like, it made it so much more serious that like, not only is there like a group of people looking to me to like start something and then lead them, but if it falls on its face, it'll be public. So I think the pressure that I put on myself for that made it hard at the beginning, but then once we like got a rhythm going, I feel like we're in a good spot now.
I mean,
Hope, knock on wood.
Yeah.
Personally, I think you're doing amazing. So.
And I feel like that's kind of what a lot of grad students go through, if not all grad students, where you have that internal pressure on yourself to perform to such a level that it gets to be heavy.
Oh yeah.
And at least like with this group of people, you're at least able to lean on them for support. Whereas I know a lot of grad students kind of feel isolated in their labs, and they just put all this pressure on themselves to do the best they can and produce data on a timely scale and get out of here on time.
Yep. That's a big one.
So I loved getting to talk to different grad students in our program about that kind of stuff. Yeah. That was one of my favorite things about doing the podcast so far.
Yeah. It is a really good like bonding experience, I feel like, so that everybody feels a little bit less alone. Yeah. Because it is very like science is a very lonely thing sometimes. It's weird because it's so collaborative. You have to read other papers, you have to talk to other people about what they're doing. That way you like don't repeat things that have already been done. You don't try things that don't work if someone else has already tried them, for example. But if you're like doing your experiment, whether it's like you're a bioinformatician, whether you're like a lab scientist, whatever, you're alone, and you do it like if something goes wrong, it's on you, and if something works, it's because you did it. But it's nice to have something like an outlet where you get to talk to other people, and a lot of times you see that like the way that you feel is the way that other people feel at the same time, and that makes you feel better. Right. You're like, oh, it's not just me. This is like normal.
Yeah. So like speaking of like all the challenges and just just even feelings of being overwhelmed in grad school, like you really got like an S on your chest, like for real. Like I mean all the challenges of grad school, you're running this podcast, you're planning a wedding. And you also like are a science communicator. Like you have your blog, The Social Scientist. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. My blog is sort of my secret weapon, so when people talk about it, I'm like, oh, they know. I started the blog actually after I took that agricultural communications class in undergrad, because I just didn't want to stop doing what I was doing, and I enjoyed it so much that I was like, I might as well just keep on going. And that was also right at the time when I was starting to seriously read scientific papers. Like I finally felt like I was equipped enough mentally that I could get through a scientific paper and more or less take away what the points were and like what they had achieved and everything. And it made me feel so good to be able to read what people were doing. So I was like, wow, they're at like the forefront of knowledge. That's also why I came to graduate school. So it's like, you're at like the forefront of like the frontier of what we know and what we don't know. And that is so cool. And so I wanted other people to be able to experience that. And like one of the big things was I was trying to explain, I think, a paper that I had read to my parents. And I was having the hardest time and they're both super smart people, but they're not trained in like biology, which was most of what I was reading. And so I was like, okay, like if I can't effectively tell my parents about this paper that I think is really cool, I have to practice. Like I have to get better at this. So the blog was sort of a way for me to practice those skills, to try and get a little better at them. And now I'm hopefully transitioning it to be more of like an interview-based thing, similar to what we're doing now. Oh, cool. Because as much as like I know a lot about biology and genetics and plant genetics, obviously, but there's so much more that we need to talk about that I am not an expert in. So I'm gonna go to the experts and see if I can get them to tell me their message in a way that's easy for people to understand.
Oh, that's awesome. So like how often are you posting on your blog?
I'm a little inconsistent. Graduate school made it a little hard to be consistent there for a while, but ideally monthly. That's my plan for myself.
So, okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that's great because
that's one more thing on your plate.
Yeah. Like I feel like anything more than that, I'd be like, oh Jesus. Girl, are you okay?
Right. Coordinating alone with people, honestly, is like, okay, you have to give yourself enough time to like schedule the interview, make sure that you're ready, write questions, do enough like background that you have intelligent questions to ask, that kind of a thing. Yeah.
So what kind of topics like motivate you to write those blog posts?
Ooh, I mean, I like everything. For some reason, I love space, which is so funny because I don't know a thing about space. Like, I am not an educated person to talk to about outer space. I just think it's fascinating. I'm not even that good at physics. I love physics, and I am bad at it. So that's one of the things I would love to interview someone who's like an actual astrophysicist and be like, what do you think about like the James Webb Telescope?
Yeah.
And like tell me about how the light works and how they actually capture the images, because I have no clue, but I'm sure there's other people who would want to know. Because like you said, everybody loves space. Space is great. From a biology standpoint, obviously I love plants. Always going to be a little biased towards plants. But I also really love the cytoskeleton, like cellular. That was my favorite thing to study when I was in undergrad, was like actin dynamics and filaments and the assembly and the disassembly. So that'll be one of the, hopefully soon, blog posts that comes out is all about the cytoskeleton, so I can geek out a little.
Did you have a tissue specific or cell type specific that you're going to go into, or just in general?
I just like cell structure and dynamics, like just like the way that cells move. Cell motility is fascinating to me. The fact that they can just move is, that was my favorite thing.
There are thousands of cells moving inside of our body right now.
Exactly.
I think about it, it's kind of weird. Like, what are you doing in there?
Don't think about it too hard.
I'm glad I can't feel it.
Yeah.
Because that would be weird.
Yeah. So do you just have like a jar with like popsicle sticks and do you just pick out topics, or do you just think like
Kind of.
I had a thought about this when I was in the shower. I'm gonna go with this one.
It's stuff that like if I'm talking to someone, even like my friends, I have a note in my phone that's like an ongoing list of ideas where if we come up with a question that I'm like, I think other people would ask this question. Like, for example, this was my last month or 2 months ago blog post. Have you guys ever thought about whether or not all of us see colors the same way?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, yeah, most people have thought about it at least once. So I did an entire blog post about that because I was like, I've had this conversation with multiple people throughout my life about whether or not human beings all see the same colors the same way, or if it's just something like we've socially constructed for ourselves. So I wrote an entire blog post about it. We do all see colors the same way.
Okay.
Sorry. Some people were really bummed by that one. But like scientifically it works out. We should all see colors pretty much the same way. But
unless there's like, you know, like the colorblind people are partially colorblind, right?
Yeah,
I love
that's
those videos when people, like their family, will give them the colorblind glasses and they're just seeing color for the first time. They make me cry every single time.
They're just so overwhelmed.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine if you didn't know, like, that there were other like, what if you could only see, like, I had a friend in high school who could only see black, white, and red.
Whoa.
Which was trippy. It was insane to talk to him.
Yeah.
But, yeah, like, I can't imagine seeing, like, blue for the first time. Like, if you've been alive for, I don't know, 15, 20 years, and you suddenly see blue, that'd be insane.
Just look up and see the sky.
I'd
probably go into an existential crisis.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
If he saw the sky was just red all the time.
Yeah.
That's
or like
nuts.
some weird like pinkish shade.
Yeah.
And suddenly it's blue.
Right.
Yeah, I definitely cry.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't even have like the concept of blue.
No.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah. So kind of crazy. So yeah, stuff like that. One of the ones that I'm hoping to do soon is talking about what the word organic means. Okay. That's another one. Like so stuff that comes up in daily conversation too that I think is good for people to know like the scientific basis for.
So for any of our listeners who might want to be getting into the science communication field, and I actually had one of my undergrads that I taught 2 semesters ago, I brought this up when we were talking about CRISPR and how important science communication was. This was right after I joined the podcast committee, and she was blown away. She was like, I didn't even know that was an option for me to pursue. I love science. I'm not the best at it, but I like understanding it and disseminating it to like people. And so if for someone like her, how would you suggest they get their foot wet?
Honestly, I mean, talking to someone like you who's involved in science communication already is a very good first step. And honestly, blogs are free to found. Like, you can start a blog pretty much anywhere. I use Wix, you can use WordPress. But it's a good way to start practicing. Like, just even if it's not like super public, you don't have to like post on your Facebook every time that you create a blog post because you don't want everybody in the world to read it. But if you start practicing, it'll start getting easier and easier. And also just telling people that you're interested in it, because most of my like connections to people through science communication have just been me telling them about my goals in science communication. And they'll be like, oh my God, I'm working on a project right now and I need to do some writing and I've never done any sort of writing in that style before. Could you help me out? And then I start helping them. Even this morning, I had a meeting with someone in the soil and crop science department or horticulture department, and she's working on developing this entire platform for doing like publication-based things for graduate students that are in agriculture. And she was like, I don't know where to start. So we talked about like how to assemble a team, how to start a podcast, like where you would get funding for equipment, how you would start a blog that goes along with the podcast, how you keep up with events and like write synopses for them so that like the members of her organization can know about it. So like the more you talk about it, the more like things will come your way, because science communication needs people. Even if like there's not always like explicit like we are looking for a science communicator, like there's a lot of ways to get involved. So just start looking, I guess.
And send an email to Blue Jeans and Boots.
Send an email to Blue Jeans and Boots.
We will have all of her contact information linked in the description box below.
Drive so many
Please
suggestions.
like, comment, and subscribe.
Get the word out.
So when you are like in your groove and you're just like, I'm gonna write, like what is getting you in that zone to write?
Discipline a lot of times. I love writing, but getting myself to start writing is really hard sometimes. So usually I have to like mentally prepare where I'm like, all right, this is my time to write. I have to get myself like either tea or coffee to sit down with. And then I put a timer on my phone usually because I'm like, okay, like if I don't really feel like doing this today, it's going to be hard, but I'm only going to do it for 15 minutes. Set a timer. I have to write for 15 minutes. And usually by the end of the 15 minutes, I keep going for like an hour. So it's just getting myself to start. It's like tricking myself every time into starting doing it. And as soon as I start, I can finish a piece usually in like an hour. So that's kind of my...
So you're not like SpongeBob with the...
Right. That's me sitting in front of my blank Word document trying to write a summary for my project.
No, that's definitely me with writing as well. Especially like, you know, we talk so much about our projects and everything, and I'm like, God, now you're telling me I have to write about it?
Yeah.
Like, so, but usually if I just like say like, oh, I'm just gonna like write like a little outline or something, and then if I can trick myself like that, and then I can write for as long as my little heart desires. Usually it's until I get hungry, and then I need a snack break.
Yeah, no, it's just about, it's the start that stops people most of the time. So as soon as you can get yourself going, then usually it works. And it helps to be passionate about what you're writing about too. So like sometimes for our projects, it's like, it's so cool what you're doing, but having to write the materials and methods section where you list off every single chemical that you had to use, it just sounds like the worst.
Yeah, I really wish somebody would have told me to have like an antibody list.
Yep.
Yes.
And like what Roche kits you're using, or
Right.
RNA kits, DNA kits. Like, I wish somebody would have told me that at the very beginning, because going back looking for things is not fun.
No.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
When did I purchase this?
Yeah. Like trying to like go back looking on Quartzy, and I'm just like,
Right. So what are your ultimate goals as a science communicator? What do you hope to accomplish?
That's a big question.
It is.
Like I think I said this before, it's like my favorite phrase, I guess, is like my goal is to humanize science. So make it accessible for people, because I think, and COVID is actually a really good example, I guess, that was like unbeknowingly bestowed upon us, which is that like science can be really, really helpful. Like the fact that we had a vaccine within 2 years of a global pandemic is insane. Like that is so quick, and it's because there were years and years and years of prior research going on before that that allowed that to happen. And I think it'd be really great if people felt safe around science. And that was one instance where I think that people didn't feel safe around science, which is such a bummer because they were safe. Like it was getting better. It's gotten a lot better. I mean, look, we're sitting here in a room. We are not 6 feet apart and none of us are wearing masks, and we're not terribly worried, right? Hopefully everyone's not worried. So, and that's like the power, Ramiah.
sorry.
That is the power of science. And I think that it's there to provide people with hope. And actually in 2021, that was the #1 word associated with science and like general American public was hope. And I think that we can use that to try and make people feel better, like to make their lives better and to make them feel better about like the world that they're living in.
And that was the example of COVID, was the example that I used when I was talking about science communication to my students, because the amount of misinterpreted data, misrepresented data, the conflicting messages that were being sent around, like you said, caused that kind of like panic of, can I trust these people who are allegedly the top of their field if they can't disseminate what their research is on or what they're talking about and doing in an effective manner that the layperson is going to be able to understand. Yeah. People are still suspicious about the vaccine because they don't understand what it's doing.
Yeah.
And we haven't, as the scientific community, been able to explain that to them to a point where they're able to say, okay, yeah, I do trust that. I'm gonna go get it and not worry about anything that
could happen.
Conspiracy theorists and whatnot.
Oh yeah.
So I think that was like a prime example of like our generation, that science communication is important, and we need to actually put effort into developing it as a field.
Yeah, I think a lot of that scientific jargon, even as a grad student trying to read papers within my own field, sometimes like I feel just like a layperson would, because I've been working in this field, I've been doing my project, I'm a 4th year student now. I should be able to understand what you're saying, and sometimes I'm just completely lost. And I feel that as a whole, even just when writing like scientific papers or articles and things, like, a lot of those things are meant to be open access for the public, but I can totally see somebody from the public being completely intimidated, because sometimes I'm intimidated reading those papers. Like sometimes boss man will send me a paper and I'll like sit down and read it, and I'm just like, there's no way you're being for real. Like there's no way you expect me to understand any of this. So like, how do we expect someone who doesn't necessarily have that biology background to be able to go into these open access journals and read these papers and actually understand what's going on? So that's something that I would like to see going forward. Also, just because papers can be hard to read,
right?
It just makes it a little easier,
right?
I think for everybody involved.
And if the publisher or the publishing companies kind of took a little bit more responsibility for that and said, hey, I don't think this is ready for publication yet because, XYZ reason is making it unclear, or not making it straightforward enough to where someone who's going to be able to sit down and replicate these results, for example, or, read it and understand how it's applying to them.
Yeah, I think a big part of that too is like with the peer review process, you're usually whoever's peer reviewing your paper is also within that field.
Right.
I think a good practice could maybe moving forward have someone who's in a completely different field try to read your paper, and if they can understand it, I think that is something that could go a long way, versus like, okay, you're already in this field, I don't have to explain what this acronym means to you or what this means to you, because I know that the reviewers are gonna already know what that means, but somebody else who could be trying to get into the field, or again in a completely different field or maybe somewhat related field, they may be completely lost again.
There should be sufficient enough information in the introduction to give you a background on the topic, to understand what the contents of the paper are, maybe not the methods or going into detail on things, and then in the summary conclusion should wrap it up in a way that's presentable, to say, if I were just to read this paper's conclusion, I would know what the results, the outcomes of that study were.
Yeah. I agree. Science has got to be accessible to everybody.
Yeah, it definitely does.
So what do you think is going to be make that push, the final push to get us as a scientific community on board with the fact that science communication does need to be higher priority on our list?
I think it's going to be, so there's a lot of people within the field of science communication. I think we have to sort of divide and conquer, or at least create sort of two separate ways that we communicate with the scientists versus with the public, because it's two very different groups of people. And for the public, they're receptive, but you have to make sure, like, you can't show a slide full of data to the general public and be like, can't you see? This is why, because that doesn't work. It's about appealing to the way that people feel. Like, they want to know, like, okay, why should I care about this? And how's it going to impact my kids? Like, why should I care about this? Is it going to affect the way that I live my day-to-day life? Is it going to affect the way that I get to work? Is it going to affect what I eat in a day? That sort of a thing is more like how you appeal science to the public. Now, getting the scientists to communicate with the public is more about encouraging that if you're doing science and you can't tell people about what you're doing, why are you doing it? Because if you can't portray like what the significance is of your research in a way that makes sense to someone external to your field, you might not even be that much of an expert in it. I mean, if you really understand something, sorry y'all, if you really understand something, you can explain it to to anybody for the most part. You can meet them at where they're at and be like, all right, this is how what I'm doing relates to like the world's problems, how it relates to people, how it relates to health or agriculture or whatever it is that you're in. And additionally, like the people who fund you as a scientist are not always going to be scientists. Sometimes it's people with backgrounds in business or economics or even like other fields of science. So you're going to have to, at some point in your career, even if you're not interested in helping the public out, which is wild, all scientists are. But if you're not, directly, you're like, I don't want to interface with like people outside of my field. I want to do my work and do it quietly and get funded. If you want to be funded, you have to be able to communicate your work effectively. And without funding, you can't do your work. So it's a necessity, I think, more than anything else.
I think you brought up a good point, which is that if we're trying to communicate to the lay public, appealing to their emotions or how it's going to impact them daily is the most impactful for that interaction. But the scientists aren't usually thinking about that. They're thinking about the nitty-gritty. This is what I did. This is what the goal was.
Exactly.
And this is the outcome. Or if you're pitching it to a business, let's say, you have to go into like a financial situation of how is my product or how is my research going to give you money or make you money. Again, that's not something that scientists are usually thinking about.
No.
So how do we get scientists to start thinking about their research in these other ways?
I mean, I think practice, honestly, like trying to talk to people, even if you have like a friend, a family member, somebody who is not in your field, try pitching them, your ideas. Try pitching, like, act as if you're trying to convince a funding source. Like, you should give me this grant because, and try it out with people, because most people are really like interested in science. Like, as a general, the public is curious. So chances are it's not going to be that big of a deal for your friend or your family member to listen to you talk for like 5 minutes. Plus, you never have that long. You can't give a full-fledged presentation. You've got like 5 minutes to convince this person in regular terms that what you're doing is interesting, important, and worth their money and their time and their thought. So I'd say practice.
That's a golden nugget right there.
Yeah, and I honestly think it should be like a part of our curriculum. Just like, I mean, we've all had to take ethics. Like, why not add a science communication course in there, or kind of combine that with ethics? Yeah, in a way.
Or for example, our program requires us to give a presentation, 15-minute presentation on our project to the rest of the program. Mine's coming up, and we don't really get any input as to how do you effectively sum up the past year of your life into 15 minutes. Yeah. So I think it'd be really helpful if we had something like that offered, where we could, they could tell us, if we'll meet you where you're at in terms of your writing style or your communication skills, and then work with you to get you to the level that you need to be able to present in 5 minutes and say, this is my project and you should care about it.
You hear that, Jean? I hope you're listening. Okay, so I think we might have one final question for you. So, being a science communicator, it seems that you have lots of options as far as, that's like an overarching kind of career, but like, what would be your ideal job as a science communicator?
That's a good question. I have a lot of different passions, so this is a hard question for me. But one of the things that I've always wanted to do, and I don't know how feasible this is, I guess I don't know if it exists, but ideally I would love to work in a university setting where I can develop a science communication curriculum, even if it's just like a couple of courses for graduate students to take, or if it's like an entire undergraduate degree. I would love to get to do that. If anyone's listening, I graduate in a year, hire me. But like, that would be such an insanely cool thing to be able to do, because not only is it being involved in science communication, and obviously I would keep up like podcasting, blogging, all the things that I do anyway, but I would love to be able to teach like the next generation of both scientists and communicators how to work together to make the world a better place.
And that's how you incite change. You get the next generation to do it.
Exactly. She's pulling out the legwork. She's going to lay it out for you.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah. I create all the coursework. You just have to take it and soak it up.
Yeah. Follow the breadcrumbs.
Yep. Yeah. Follow the breadcrumbs.
That's another golden nugget. Yeah. Follow the breadcrumbs, guys.
We've done well today. Lots of nuggets.
Yeah.
I mean, we should really be paid for this. Gene, if you're listening, I mean, you guys should consider that a little bit too. Thanks. Well, all right, y'all. Thank you guys so much for listening to Blue Jeans and Boots. If you guys have any questions about anything that we talked about today, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can follow us on all social media sites at Genetics Podcast. We hope you'll tune in